Okay, so you know Nelson Mandela, right? I mean, everyone knows Mandela, a global symbol of peace and forgiveness. But get this. His given name, Rolihlahla, means troublemaker.
Troublemaker. It really sets the stage, doesn't it? For a life dedicated to fighting injustice. I mean, it's right there from the start.
Right, like destiny calling. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the incredible life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. You know, you asked about people who truly changed the world. Well, Mandela's story, going from activist to president, it's a masterclass in perseverance, in the art of negotiation, and that unwavering pursuit of justice.
I mean, he really embodies those qualities. He shows how one person can make a difference, a huge difference.
Absolutely. And we've dug deep, going through biographies, historical records, all that good stuff, trying to grasp the essence of who he was, and we're tailoring it for you, someone who really wants to understand, to learn, you know, as efficiently as possible.
So the big picture, right? Mandela's life. It's like a roadmap for achieving lasting societal change. You see how personal belief, strategic action, and that long-term vision all come together.
It all starts back in 1918, July 18th to be exact, in a village called Mvezo, part of the Cape Province. That's where Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela enters the world. And his family background, that's pretty interesting too.
Yeah, for sure. Deep roots. We're talking royalty, the Thembu people. His great-grandfather, on his father's side, he was a king. And the name Mandela, it comes from his grandfather.
Okay, so royal lineage.
Yeah, but there's a twist. You see, his grandfather was from a left-hand house. It's a specific branch of the royal family. Influential, advisors to the king, but they couldn't actually inherit the throne.
Interesting. So a sense of being close to power, but not quite at the center of it.
Exactly. And that might have shaped Mandela's understanding of power dynamics from a young age. Now, his dad, Godla Henry Mandela, was a local chief. He was also an advisor to the king.
So continuing that tradition of leadership.
Yes, but here's another crucial detail. The story goes that Mandela's father lost his chieftaincy for standing up to a white magistrate.
Wow. Really standing up for what he believed in.
And you can bet that left a mark on young Nelson. It probably instilled this deep sense that the power structures were flawed, unjust, and needed challenging. You see that seed of defiance, that connection between authority and injustice.
Yeah, that's powerful. Okay, so then he goes to a Methodist mission school.
Yeah, that's where his formal education begins. English, Xhosa, history, geography, you know, the standard stuff. But he really got into African history. And these stories, these ideas, they're coming from elders, visitors, even a chief who had some pretty strong anti-imperialist views. It's interesting because at first, Mandela actually thought that the European colonizers brought some good things, like education.
That's surprising. You wouldn't think that based on his later actions.
It just goes to show you, even someone like Mandela, his views developed over time. They got more complex, more nuanced.
Makes you think about how our own perspectives change as we learn and experience more.
For sure. Now, when Mandela was just a teenager, his father died. He ended up being raised by the Thembu regent, Chief Jongintaba Dilindyebo. A huge change for a young man.
Must have been tough.
But Chief Jongintaba and his wife, they treated Mandela like their own son. Mandela was so grateful for that. And around that time, he went through the Ulwaluko ritual, the circumcision ceremony, when he was 16. That's a big deal in Xhosa culture, a rite of passage. It's then that he received the name Dalabunga.
A lot happening during those formative years. And then comes university. He heads to the University of Fort Hare.
Oh yeah, Fort Hare, a real breeding ground for future African leaders. He starts working on his BA, all sorts of subjects, English, anthropology, politics. He even gets into native administration and Roman Dutch law. That's where he really connects with Oliver Tambo, a lifelong friend and partner in the struggle. But his time at Fort Hare is cut short.
What happened?
Well, remember that troublemaker spirit? It crops up again. There was this student protest, a boycott over the quality of the food.
Seriously, they protested over bad food.
Hey, food is important. But the point is, Mandela gets involved, and he ends up getting suspended. Never finished his degree there.
Wow, so no privy counselor for him. Instead, he ends up in Johannesburg.
Yep, looking for a new path. To survive, he does odd jobs, eventually continues studying law, and those years in Johannesburg, in townships like Alexandra, they really opened his eyes. The brutal reality of racial discrimination, the poverty it caused, it hit him hard. That experience, it fueled his commitment to change. I mean, really fueled it.
You can just imagine the impact. So that brings us to the beginning of his real revolutionary activity and the ANC Youth League.
And here's where things get interesting. You see his thinking evolve. At first, he wasn't sure about communism. He saw it as something foreign. But as he learned more, he saw how important it was to build a multiracial front against apartheid. People like Moses Kotane influenced him, and the Soviet Union was supporting liberation movements around the world. Mandela even started reading Marx, Lenin, Mao.
That's quite a shift.
It was. He was looking for ways to apply those ideas to the South African situation. And he saw a connection between the Marxist idea of a classless society and the traditional African way of life, the communal structures. It wasn't just blindly adopting a foreign ideology, it was making it relevant to his own experience.
That makes sense. So then the ANC Youth League, the ANCYL, they were pushing for a more aggressive approach.
Absolutely. They were founded in 1944, and Mandela was right there at the forefront. They believed the ANC needed to take a more assertive, proactive stance against racial discrimination.
A real departure from the more moderate approach.
Right, and this leads into the Defiance campaign of the early 50s. Nonviolent civil disobedience, a powerful tool. And Mandela's role in organizing and leading that campaign was crucial. He became the Transvaal ANC president, solidifying his position as a leader in the fight against apartheid.
So he's rising through the ranks, becoming more and more prominent.
And amidst all this, he and Oliver Tambo, they open up a law firm together. Mandela and Tambo, the first black-owned law firm in South Africa.
That's incredible, juggling activism and a law practice.
It was. They focused on cases of police brutality, defending those who were targeted by the apartheid regime. They gained huge respect in the black community, but also constant harassment from the authorities. It made their work incredibly difficult, almost impossible at times.
And then comes the Congress of the People, the Freedom Charter, 1955.
This was a landmark event that gathered people from all over, all the different anti-apartheid organizations, to lay out their vision for a future South Africa. Equal rights for everyone, a society based on fairness, and nationalization of key industries. This was their roadmap to a better future.
A powerful statement, but the government wasn't going to just sit back and watch.
No, of course not. That's when the treason trial hit.
That must have been a major blow.
It was a huge disruption. They arrest Mandela, along with practically the entire ANC leadership.
Right.
And the charge, treason.
Treason, that's a serious accusation.
And the trial went on and on for years. They eventually got acquitted, but it showed just how determined the government was to crush the resistance. It also made some people in the ANC start to think that maybe peaceful protest alone wasn't enough.
Which leads us to a turning point, a huge one. The formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, the armed wing of the ANC, armed resistance.
That shift didn't happen overnight. The Sharpeville massacre in 1960, that was a turning point. The police just opened fire on peaceful protesters. It was horrific, indiscriminate killing. It shook Mandela and many others to the core. They realized that nonviolence alone might not be enough to bring down apartheid.
So they felt they had no choice but to fight back.
It was a heavy decision, a last resort. MK was formed to target strategic installations to disrupt the apartheid state. And Mandela, he knew they needed international support, so he goes on a tour of Africa, drumming up support for their armed struggle. He understood the importance of global solidarity in isolating the regime.
But that all came crashing down with his arrest and the Ravoni trial.
Yeah, he gets arrested again. This time the charges are sabotage, other serious offenses. But that trial, it became a global platform. He delivered his famous "I am prepared to die" speech. It was powerful. It resonated around the world, even though the South African government tried to censor it.
Powerful words, a defining moment.
But the verdict, life imprisonment, 1964, was a brutal sentence. But in a way, it elevated him to this global symbol of the fight against oppression.
From prison, his image only grew stronger. So let's talk about those prison years. Robben Island. That place became synonymous with his struggle.
Robben Island was designed to break people. Hard labor in the lime quarry, bad food, harsh treatment. But Mandela, his inner strength, his leadership, it just shone through. He kept the prisoners united, kept their spirits up. He used those years to learn, to plan, to continue the struggle from within those walls.
And the calls for his release, they just kept growing louder.
The pressure on South Africa was immense. Economic sanctions, global condemnation. Even people like Margaret Thatcher, who hadn't been supportive at first, she started calling for his release. He'd become this moral giant.
Then in 1985, President Botha offered him a deal. Freedom, but with conditions.
A conditional release. Renounce violence, they said, and you can go free. But Mandela, he refused. He said only free men can negotiate. He wanted the ANC unbanned, no strings attached. It was a powerful statement. Even after all those years in prison, it It showed his unwavering commitment to justice.
An incredible act of defiance. So that paved the way for those secret talks with the government, right?
It did. Behind the scenes, things were starting to shift. The government realized that a purely military solution wasn't working. Mandela, he knew that negotiations were the only way to achieve lasting peace.
But it must have been a difficult decision to sit down with the people who had imprisoned him.
Oh, absolutely. These were delicate, secretive talks. They had to build trust, find common ground. And after years of deadlock, finally in 1990, Mandela walked free.
That must have been an incredible moment.
The world watched as he stepped out of prison. In his first speech, he called for peace, reconciliation with the white minority. But he was clear. The armed struggle would continue until they had genuine negotiations, until they achieved equal rights for all South Africans. He was holding firm to his principles.
So the fight wasn't over, just entering a new phase.
Exactly. Those negotiations with the government, they were intense. Mandela led the ANC delegation. There were so many obstacles, so many moments where it seemed like it would all fall apart. But he kept pushing, kept looking for solutions, always focused on a peaceful transition. They reached some crucial agreements. The Crucial Minute, the Pretoria Minute, that included a ceasefire.
And eventually, those talks led to the Xhosa, right, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa.
Right, they were hammering out the details of a new constitution, a multiracial democracy. It was a long, complex process, but they got there. And in 1993, Mandela and de Klerk, they shared the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well-deserved recognition for their efforts.
It was. It acknowledged their work in dismantling apartheid and building a new South Africa. And then finally, in 1994, the first truly democratic elections. The ANC won a landslide victory, and Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president.
A truly historic moment.
The culmination of decades of struggle. His presidency was all about healing, about building a new nation. He formed a government of national unity, bringing together people from different parties, trying to foster a sense of shared ownership in this new South Africa.
And his efforts at reconciliation, reaching out to the white community, those were so important.
They were. Like, when he met with former apartheid leaders, that sent a strong message of forgiveness. And then there was that iconic moment, him wearing the Springboks rugby jersey. The Springboks, that was a symbol of white South Africa. There he was, the black president, embracing it. It was powerful. It showed that even symbols of the old regime could be transformed, could become symbols of unity.
An incredible act of reconciliation.
It was. And domestically, he launched the Reconstruction and Development Program, the RDP.
I've heard about that. What did it aim to do?
It was a massive undertaking, aimed at addressing the inequality that apartheid had created. Housing, education, healthcare, infrastructure, all the things that had been denied to the black majority for so long. It was about improving the lives of millions of South Africans.
A huge task, and internationally, he was active on the world stage.
Oh, absolutely. Diplomacy was a big part of his presidency. He built relationships with leaders all over the world. Some of those relationships were controversial, though, particularly in the West, like his friendships with Suharto in Indonesia, Fidel Castro in Cuba, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya.
I can see why those would raise eyebrows.
Yeah, but Mandela defended those connections. He said the people who had supported their struggle, they weren't necessarily enemies. And he even tried to mediate the Lockerbie bombing dispute. He wanted to play a role in resolving conflicts, wherever they were.
It's interesting to see how his past experiences shaped his approach to international relations.
Definitely. Now, after just one term as president, he decided to step down, which is a powerful statement in itself, showing his commitment to democracy.
It showed he wasn't clinging to power.
Exactly. And even after leaving office, he didn't just retire. He poured his energy into the Nelson Mandela Foundation, focusing on development, education, and especially fighting HIV/AIDS.
That was a huge issue in South Africa at the time.
It was. And Mandela became a vocal advocate for access to antiretroviral drugs. He felt that it was an area where more could have been done during his presidency.
He was always looking for ways to help, to make things better. And in his later years, he became more critical of Western powers.
He did, especially interventions like NATO in Kosovo and the US in Iraq. He believed in multilateralism in international law, and he felt that those interventions were unilateral, a disregard for international norms.
He never shied away from expressing his views, even when they were unpopular.
No, he didn't. And one of his last big achievements, one that brought so much joy to South Africa, was securing the 2010 FIFA World Cup. He was instrumental in that. His final public appearance was at the closing ceremony, a beautiful moment.
A fitting way to end his public life. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 95, leaving behind this incredible legacy. Thinking about his political ideology, he called himself an African nationalist and a socialist.
And that's accurate. He believed in self-determination for Africa and a more equal distribution of wealth. His relationship with the South African Communist Party was complex. There's good evidence to suggest he was a member, although they kept that quiet for political reasons. But even though he believed in socialist ideas, he was also pragmatic. During his presidency, he did implement some privatization policies.
He had to balance his ideals with the realities of the global economy at the time.
Right. And on a personal level, he was a very private person in many ways. But people who knew him well, they talked about his sense of humor, his ability to connect with anyone. He was stubborn, but fiercely loyal to his friends and his principles. Generally, he was warm, welcoming, always looking for common ground, even with his former enemies. And it's funny, he considered himself an Anglophile in some ways. He appreciated certain aspects of British culture.
That's surprising. You wouldn't expect that from someone who spent years fighting against British colonialism.
It just shows how complex he was. And his family life was important to him too. 3 marriages, 6 children.
He was a man of many dimensions, and his global legacy is undeniable.
Absolutely. Over 250 awards and honors, including the Nobel Peace Prize. He's revered in South Africa, called mænʻdɛlə, their father of the nation. The UN declared his birthday July 18th as Mandela Day, and they renamed the UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Mandela Rules. Statues, memorials, books, films, songs. His life has inspired people all over the world, and he was one of the founders of the Elders, a group of global leaders who work for peace and human rights.
So Mandela's story, it's a testament to the power of one person to change the world. From troublemaker to a global icon of peace. He fought tirelessly for justice, even when he was facing decades in prison. His commitment never wavered. And then his ability to forgive, to reconcile, that's truly inspiring.
What's amazing is how he never stopped growing, never stopped adapting. He adjusted his methods, but his core values, that belief in justice and equality, they never changed. He shows us that even the most entrenched systems of oppression, they can be overcome. It takes vision, courage, and that unwavering commitment to a better future for everyone.
It's a story packed with lessons for anyone who wants to understand how change happens. And for you, someone who wants to gain knowledge, who wants to understand those key moments in history, Mandela's life is a perfect example of how one person's conviction can truly shape the world. It highlights the power of staying true to your principles, even when you have to adapt your approach.
Exactly. He shows us what true leadership means. It's not just about holding power, it's about using your influence to uplift, to unite, to give people hope. Even in the darkest times, his spirit shines through, inspiring people around the world to keep fighting for justice and equality.
And when you think about Mandela's willingness to negotiate with his former oppressors, his belief in unity, it makes you think, how can we apply those principles to the challenges we face today? In our own lives and the world around us, what divisions can we overcome by embracing that same spirit of courageous reconciliation?
Those are the questions we should all be asking ourselves. How can we build bridges? How can we create a more just and equitable world? Mandela's life offers a powerful roadmap for achieving lasting change.
That's a powerful way to put it. Mandela's story isn't just history, it's a call to action.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter how small.
Food for thought, for sure. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. It's been an incredible journey.
My pleasure. It's always inspiring to revisit Mandela's life and legacy.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving for a better world.